Yeah.
Welcome, everybody. My name is Mina Jane. I'm the director of the Ashland Public Library in Massachusetts, and I am super thrilled to be here with author Randi Minetor, who is going to be talking about her book, The Complete Language of Birds, because we love birds here in Ashland, and it seems like all over the world, really, birding is a thing. So before we get to Randy, just want to say a couple things. One is I'd like to thank the Friends of the Ashland Public Library for supporting all of our programs. We can't do all this fun stuff without them. And I'd like to thank Randy for letting us share this program with other local libraries. 30 signed on to partner with us to bring Randy to your homes. So thank you, Randy, for that, because I think, when libraries work together, we just make magic. Um, and so Randy's going to be talking for about 40 minutes, and then we're going to be doing a Q&A. If you have questions, please put them in the Q&A, which is a button at the bottom of your Zoom screen. I will be turning the chat off during Randy's presentation, so we're not distracted, but you're welcome to send notes to me if you have a tech issue or anything like that through the chat. And you can buy signed books by Randy from Aesop's Fable, our favorite local indie bookstore. I'll put a link to that in the chat, and I will also send it out to everybody in a recap email after tonight's presentation. So without further ado, I just want to say that Randy, I just found out, is she's the president of the Rochester Birding Club for 2 more weeks. So if you want to meet her and you live in that area, run over to that that area, that club. But The Complete Language of Birds is one of her books that she's written that is that illustrated history of birds. It's gorgeous. It's absolutely gorgeous. So you definitely want to check this book out from either buying it or getting it from your local library. The thing I think is super interesting about Randy is that she has traveled to how many of the national parks? Like
Three,
50%.
three, 360 of the 430 national parks. So we have 70 to go.
That is amazing. And I would imagine that a lot of your images are from those travels. So I cannot wait to hear all about it. Randy, welcome. Thank you so much for being here. Tell us more about yourself and this amazing book.
Well, thank you, Mina, and thank you to all of you who have tuned in this evening from all over the country. What a pleasure. And what a pleasure to talk to people who support their local libraries. I could not do what I do without the reference librarians who look things up for me, honestly, all over the world, especially for finding newspaper stories that are still on microfilm or even some of them on paper up in dusty attics that I can't get to. So thank you for continuing to use and support your libraries. We need them. We need them. Let me tell you a little bit about how I came to write The Complete Language of Birds. It's definitely connected to my travels with my husband, Nick, in our quest to see all of the units of the National Park Service system. We've been to all 50 states now, and we've visited national parks in all of them. And as I said, for a total so far of 360 of the 430 national park sites. We've been at it. Uh-oh, just a moment. Oh, there we go. Okay. We have been at this since November 2000 when we were on our way to Florida to visit my parents, and Nick bought our first passport to your national parks. I bet a whole bunch of you out there have this little book that you get stamped at every national park that you go to. Our first one was Antietam National Battlefield in Maryland, and that's where we started collecting passport stamps. And Nick took the map, this map that comes in the passport, took it out and opened it up in the front seat of our car and looked at it and said, we could go to all of these. And I said, "Oh, okay." And that was it. There was no big discussion. There was nothing. It was just, we were so simpatico that we just said, "Yep, let's do this. This is our life now." Well, it's a very expensive hobby, so I needed to find a way to subsidize this absurd challenge that we'd undertaken. So I woke up one day with an idea. I decided I would become a travel writer and a nature writer and earn enough money to keep going on all of those trips. And thank goodness that worked. There we go. So when you visit all of the national parks, monuments, memorials, battlefields, historic sites, and so on, you learn a great deal about things that people believed before we had science, all the science and technology that we enjoy now. The National Park Service has dozens of sites that tell stories, in particular, of indigenous people living throughout the continent, what they perceived about the world around them, and how they use birds and animals to explain some of the things that they experienced. So these sites, like this one, this gorgeous, gorgeous place in Mesa Verde National Park, and this very famous ruin known as the Palace. Um, these preserve remnants of cultures that lived thousands of years ago, including all kinds of mythology and folklore involving birds and animals. Nick and I have not been overseas yet, but my editor at Quarto Publishing wanted a book that could be sold all over the world. So it had to include the folklore and mythology of a lot of different cultures. So the research for this was really unusually challenging. And if you know anything about me, you know I also write the books about all the people who go to national parks and don't live to come home, the nonfiction books known as the Death in the Park series. So I'm used to doing some pretty serious research, but many of these stories have been passed down for thousands of years by word of mouth. So finding their origins was very, very tricky. But thanks to the work of historians who capture these oral histories and write them down, and of librarians who know where to look, I've compiled this encyclopedia of more than 400 birds and their stories throughout the ages. So let's go back all the way to the creation. In the beginning, there was a goose. This goose, in fact, an Egyptian goose, and at the time, the only being in the universe. Egyptians called this Genjin Ware, or the Great Honker. This goose carried and protected the egg that, when hatched, would produce all of the life on Earth. But another being actually laid this egg, Jeb, god of Earth, also known by the nickname Great Cackler. Whether or not Jeb was actually a goose himself is subject to interpretation, but when he evolved into this human form over the centuries, he often wore an Egyptian goose or another bird, like this, what I believe here looks a whole lot like a herring gull, as part of his headdress. And Egypt's creation story includes a third being, Amun, Lord of the Thrones, who also liked to take the form of a goose, as you can see in this petroglyph that was drawn thousands of years ago. In fact, the legend says that Amun's goose cry of victory over his adversaries became the very first sound heard by the people of Earth. And to commemorate this, Amun is known as the Great Shrieker. So Jeb laid a golden egg that contained the sun. Genjinware incubated and hatched the egg that brought all the other beings in existence, and Amun's goose presence scared off all the early adversaries. The result was, well, let there be light. Who knew the geese could be so powerful? Down at the southern tip of Africa, another creation was going on. The indigenous Khoisan people tell the story of their creator, a god called Swigob, who ignited a great fire to bring all of the traits of the animals out of the ether and into reality. So he gathered all of these traits and he baked them into all kinds of animal shapes. Kind of gives new meaning to Christmas cookies, doesn't it? And as he did this, a Cory bustard, a very large bird with very broad wings, served as his helper. The Cory bustard fanned the flames continuously with his wings, keeping the fire burning until all of the animals were fully baked. And in a wonderful Aboriginal legend from Australia, all life began in the dark, skulking its way around the earth as best it could. The spirits of the sky spent part of an eternity deciding how they would bring light into the world. So they built a huge pile of sticks that they planned to ignite, but they didn't want to frighten all the beings on the ground by suddenly producing a big burst of light, something they'd never seen before and wouldn't understand. So one day, an emu named Dinawan and a brolga named Bralach sat side by side on their nests, protecting their eggs in the dark. And as they talked about the children they would soon bring into the world, they began to argue about whose children would be stronger and whose would be more clever. The discussion became more and more heated, just like any other two expectant mothers. And finally, Bralach grabbed one of Dinawan's eggs in her bill and used all of her fury to throw it as high as she could into the sky. And so high did it go that it collided with that huge pile of sticks collected by the spirits. The egg broke open, the yolk spilled over the sticks, and somehow it ignited them into a big bonfire. The sky lit up, bathed the earth in light, and showed everyone just how beautiful Australia was. Now, from that day forward, the spirits decided that they would build a great fire every morning to light up the earth and let it burn until evening. But they still worried that the transition to light every day would frighten the animals. So they searched for one animal who could call to everyone each morning before they lit the fire to let them know that light was on the way soon. And which animal did they choose? Well, if you've been to Australia, you know it's the laughing kookaburra, who was only too happy to volunteer to play this important role every morning for the rest of eternity. To this day, this devoted bird wakes up an entire continent by calling just before sunrise. Now, after the birds helped get the world up and running, they continued to play pivotal roles in the early days of the earth. One of the big surprises in my research for this book was the sheer number of cultures around the world that record a great flood in their origin stories. Pretty much everywhere in the world experienced a great flood. We all know the story of Noah and the ark, of course, and that as the waters began to recede once the 40-day flood stopped, Noah released first a raven and then a dove to see if they would find land. The raven never returned, suggesting perhaps it had found some nice waterlogged carrion to chow down on after sitting on that ark for 40 days. The dove, however, felt more of a duty to Noah for saving its life, so it brought back an olive leaf. This showed Noah that the land had begun to emerge from the water. Well, other cultures tell the flood story a little differently. In some areas of the United States, Christians associate the gorgeous painted bunting with the rainbow that God sent to Noah as a sign of his covenant with the earth. Painted buntings, look at them, they're the living embodiment of the rainbow, reminding us that God protects us and will not destroy his entire creation again. Now, in the Birachik area of Turkey, people believe that Noah released a northern bald ibis from the ark, a bird that they see as a symbol of fertility to guide the repopulation of the earth. Very logical. But the Athabascans of Alaska believe that the Great Flood came to an end with the help of the American bittern. The bittern all of its friends swallowed enormous amounts of water, flew to where more water was needed, and regurgitated the water to form these all of those braided rivers that you see in Alaska and all of the other kinds of rivers and lakes and so on all over the world. Now, an Ojibwa legend tells us that long ago, the Creator sent a great flood to purify the world and drown everything evil. And one man, Wayne Abuju, worked quickly and built himself a raft. And he managed to keep himself and just a few choice animals afloat for an entire month as they waited for the water to recede. But the water didn't go down. So he summoned several different birds to dive to the bottom and retrieve some dirt from the old world, which he would then use to start a new continent. The loon was the logical savior, and oddly enough, he tried and he failed. The dove volunteered, but as you can imagine, that did not go so well, and the poor thing nearly drowned. So finally, a lone coot took on this challenge without telling anyone what he intended. time passed before the other birds even noticed he was gone. And then they started to search for him. They found him floating behind the raft, unconscious but still breathing. Sure enough, when they started to resuscitate him, they found a little bit of mud from the bottom of the floodwaters stuck to his bill. That was all Bujo needed to start the continent all over again. Now, it's worth noting that many other Native American legends of the Great Flood tell the same story, but with a different waterfowl as the hero. In the Algonquin culture, for example, it's the merganser who brings up this little morsel of earth using its strong feet to push off from the raft and drive itself down. And that little sharp bill to dig up just a little bit of earth before coming back up. Now, according to a Maori legend from New Zealand, the god Tawaki, who makes lightning and thunder, caused the flood when he created the crystal floor of heaven. The crystal floor caused all the water in the sky to fall in one place, on Fiordland, where these Fiordland penguins live. This area receives some of the most torrential rain in New Zealand, so the Fiordland penguins have been credited with actually making the rainfall and perhaps even assisting Tawaki in creating the Great Flood. And in the jungles of Panama, the Great Flood serves as an origin story for the Great Tinamu. It seems that after the flood covered the world in water, the sun returned and the rainbow appeared, and the great tinamu, which is a dun-colored bird that blends right in with the foliage around it, saw the rainbow and its intense colors just frightened it. It flew away from all the other animals, away from the ark, and retreated into the murkiest part of the forest, where it lives to this day, shunning color in favor of darkness. Now, these are just a few of the flood-related stories I found in which birds played a starring role, but these amazing birds have many more lessons to teach us throughout folklore and mythology of the world. Before I started work on the complete language of birds, I hadn't really thought much about what birds must have represented to ancient civilizations. We take so much knowledge for granted now, but there was once a time when people knew very little science about birds' habits and behavior. So when these people looked at the world around them and all the things they couldn't explain, they filled in a lot of the gaps with birds and their amazing abilities. So here's one of my favorite examples of this. Before science understood what we do now about migration and how it happens, it seemed to many observers that birds just vanished in the fall, just disappeared, and then they'd reemerge magically in the spring from wherever they had hidden over the winter. So one of the most bizarre theories about this involves the barnacle goose, a European species that, unlike our own Canada goose, well, actually, quite like our own Canada goose. Theorists back in the 500s saw these barnacles along wharves and docks and on the bottoms of their boats. So they guessed that the geese transformed themselves somehow into barnacles for the winter, adhering to surfaces to wait out the frigid weather. And in spring, the warmer weather gave them what they needed to change back, to just explode back into being geese again. Back in 350 BC, the learned Greek philosopher Aristotle theorized that swallows, with their ability to dive so close to the surface of lakes and ponds, actually dove to the bottom of the lake in the fall and burrowed in the mud there to wait out the winter. Apparently, the whole oxygen thing was really kind of lost on Aristotle. So this theory actually held on until the late 1700s, if you can imagine that, when sailors returning to Europe from warmer climates at the end of winter reported seeing flocks of swallows in Africa and somehow managed to put two and two together that these swallows were their swallows. Then in 1822, German villagers shot down a white stork that had a wooden spear piercing its neck. The spear's unusual wood could only have come from Africa. Suddenly, in a flash of insight, the German hunters realized that this bird must have migrated all the way to another continent and back. So a single white stork finally changed the way ornithologists understood migration. That being said, so much of what people around the world attribute to birds has really nothing whatsoever to do with science. Wondrous parrots like the imperial Amazon, the national bird of the Commonwealth of Dominica, and the gray parrot, which is very common in Africa, are believed to have the ability to communicate with the spiritual realm. Not only can they fly high enough to reach the gods in the clouds, but they can actually form words, a wondrous thing that only a few birds can do. So you had to really kind of watch what you said around one, or you might tattle to the ruling spirits, or worse, to your deceased relatives. And good God, what would be waiting for you when you got up there? One of our favorite North American birds, the anhinga, has represented a lot of different things in different cultures. We know the bird's classic stance, holding its wings out from its side to dry after diving for a fish dinner. But some Christians see this as symbolic of the crucifix, making the anhinga a perpetual reminder of the passion of Christ and therefore selfless, forgiving, and holy. On the other hand, the indigenous Tupi people of Brazil gave the anhinga its name, which means devil bird in their language. They determined that the anhinga is a trickster and a troublemaker, a conclusion they decided on because the bird swims with its body submerged and only its head and neck out of the water, resembling a snake. So, what's this guy up to? What's he got to hide? He can't be up to anything good. Now, here's one of my favorites. Two categories of birds, magpies and mynas, depending on where you live, require us to be especially respectful when we see them, asking after their health and their family's welfare. If we treat them with disdain or we ignore them altogether, we may meet a particular fate based on how many of the birds we see together. There's even a nursery rhyme to make this clear. One for sorrow, two for joy, three for a girl, four for a boy, five for silver, six for gold, seven for a secret never to be told. So whenever you see a myna or a magpie, be sure to greet it very warmly. Good afternoon, sir or miss. How are you today? Is your family well? If you're with a group and you don't want to look like a lunatic, just smile and nod and bow slightly. I'm told the bird will understand. You had to see us in Hawaii, where mynas are essentially the starling of the islands. And everywhere you look, there's mynas. And there I was, bobbing my head. Hello, hello, very nice to meet you. But one of my favorite stories, I seem to say, have a lot of favorite stories, involves the common kingfisher, a gorgeous bright blue bird of the rivers and lakes of Europe, Southeast Asia, and parts of the Asian continent, and obviously a relative of the belted kingfisher, the ringed kingfisher, and the green kingfisher that we have here in North America. This is the tragic tale of Ceyx and Alcyone, two lovers in the days when Greek culture involved many gods living on Mount Olympus. Ceyx and Alcyone were soulmates, but equally important at the time, they were particularly well matched in physical beauty. This made the couple very popular with the gods, who observed their romance with great interest, much the way we watch The Bachelor. The pair married, they began a life together, and they were so happy that they gave each other little nicknames like every married couple does. Unfortunately, they chose to call one another Zeus and Hera, the names of the two gods at the very top of the Greek pantheon. Well, instead of Zeus being flattered by this made him very angry because Zeus has anger management issues and he took things out on everybody. So one day, when Ceyx boarded a ship to Ionia, Zeus kicked up a storm, and his wrath created a massive wave that swallowed up the ship. Ceyx drowned, and his body sank to the bottom of the sea. Hera, however, stepped in. She knew how devastated Alcyone would be if she never knew for certain what had happened to Ceyx. As she watched the young woman wait and weep by the shoreline, Hera caused Ceyx's body to wash up right near where Alcyone waited for word of him. Alcyone, anguished by her loss, threw herself into the sea, and drowned. Well, now Zeus felt remorse for the revenge he had exacted, and he resurrected both of them from the dead and turned the two lovers into halcyon birds, naming them for Alcyone. So today we know them as common kingfishers, and every summer for 2 weeks, the winds grow calm so the kingfishers can nest on the beach and bring a brood into the world. We call these the halcyon days, a period of calm and happiness, and Alcyone remains part of the taxonomic name for several of the world's kingfishers. Now, have you ever wondered how the goldfinch got their bright color? The Iroquois people did. The Native Americans that lived right here where I am in New York State, and the story's been passed down for generations. It seems that a fox chased a raccoon to make the little bandit its dinner. The raccoon ran up a tree, so the hungry fox waited all day at the bottom, but the raccoon didn't come down. Eventually, the fox dozed off, and when he awoke, he found, guess what? The raccoon was gone, but before it left, it painted the fox's eyes shut with resin from the tree. The resin had hardened, and he couldn't get it off. So the fox called and called and called for help. And some drab little finches in the neighborhood took pity on the crying fox, and they flew in and they pecked off the resin. The fox thanked them for this good deed by using some yellow flowers nearby to color their plumage bright yellow, the color of sunshine. I picked here Canada goldenrod, which is very common and native in upstate New York, as maybe the thing that colored the goldfinches yellow. And the goldfinches wear this plumage all spring and summer to this day. Now, the story of the trapped fox and the helpful bird is one of the tales that shows up in the folklore of many different cultures, where it may be used to explain a hummingbird's iridescence or the bright color of a northern cardinal. And we can imagine people of many different tribes coming together thousands of years ago, as the National Park Service tells us that they did, in meeting places like Chaco Canyon in New Mexico, Wapatki in Arizona, or this place, now known as Aztec Ruins National Monument in northern New Mexico. They came together to trade goods and tell stories in kivas or in the shadows of the ceremonial mounds. And one tribe might have an explanation for a specific thing that the others have not yet found an explanation for. So these stories spread and became part of one another's cultures. Now, few birds have inspired as many folk tales about themselves as the northern lapwing, a very well-known, easily recognized bird of Europe and part of Asia. A Swedish story tells us of a young woman serving as a handmaiden to the Holy Mother Mary in Sweden. Yeah, in Sweden. And there's apparently Jesus and John the Baptist spent some time in the Orkney Islands in Scotland. I can't speak to how that happened, but apocryphal stories are what they are, and this one was in Sweden. Anyway, the girl stole Mary's scissors, and Mary, a more wrathful version of the Holy Mother than we know, punished her by turning her into a northern lapwing. She chose the lapwing because its tail resembles a pair of scissors, and the lapwing only had one call. It said tavit, which is Swedish for I stole. Northern lapwing is also said to have been present at the crucifixion of Jesus. This story tells us that there were three birds that came to Christ's aid on the cross. First, the stork came and called, "Strengthen him!" And then the swallow actually tried to remove the thorns from his crown to give him some relief. But finally, the northern lapwing came in and circled the cross, crying, "Let him suffer!" Jesus blessed the stork and the swallow, but he condemned the lapwing for all time. And now we have many stories about lapwings as mischievous or even cruel birds. And the lapwing's bad reputation even extends from Europe into Asia, where a Russian creation story says that when the Slavic god Perun made the world, he gave all the birds a job to carry water to fill all the indentations for seas, lakes, and rivers. Maybe an idea he got from the bitterns over in Alaska. Everyone pitched in except the lapwing, who refused. So God punished the bird by declaring that it would always have to get its water from puddles. And today, if you want to see a lapwing, you need to look in mudflats with shallow water, where, by the way, you'll see all of the other sandpipers and plovers that you would expect to see. Centuries later, perhaps as part of its punishment for all of these transgressions, lapwing eggs became a delicacy. The eggs were not cultivated on farms because lapwings can't make it in domestic life. So the eggs have to be found in the wild, making them a very pricey item in markets, none of which was good for the lapwings. So in recent years, the practice has been banned by the European Union, or there wouldn't be any more lapwings. But in the Netherlands, finding the first lapwing egg of the season is still a custom. Now, however, there's a catch. You have to leave it where you found it in the wild. So let's look now at some of the bravest and the most superstitious people on the planet, those who ply their trade on ships at sea. Entire books have been written about the omens and the portents and the curses brought by pelagic birds over the boats filled with sailors, fishermen, or even explorers. Seafarers especially revere the albatross. Any of the 22 species of these magnificent birds, including this blazing albatross that we were fortunate to see in Hawaii last year, that my husband managed to get this picture of. For centuries, having an albatross around your neck has been synonymous with carrying a weighty burden that we can't wait to dispose of as soon as possible. This expression comes from Samuel Taylor Coleridge's poem, The Rime of the Ancient Mariner, and I will not recite that for you this evening. But we do learn that killing an albatross is the worst luck of all bad luck, inviting shipwreck and certain death. So, how do we counteract this omen? The person who killed the bird must wear it on a rope around his neck, literally carrying the burden of the misdeed. An albatross can weigh as much as 18 pounds, so this penance is not something to take lightly. Albatross lore on the high seas can govern the lives of sailors with endless speculation of whether an albatross following a ship is a good omen with the promise of the bird's protection or a bad omen of an oncoming storm, with the bird hiding behind the ship to avoid the worst of it. Whichever it turns out to be, there's yet another twist. The albatross most likely carries the soul of a sailor lost at sea. So whether it's good news or bad, the bird's protection or its warning are all meant with the best of intentions. Coleridge's poem dominates sea lore, so it may seem that albatrosses are the only birds that affect a sailor's fortune. But the family of northern storm petrels also carry considerable weight with seafarers. The storm part of the name comes from their habit of taking refuge from an oncoming gale by following closely behind a ship, letting the large structure block the worst of the weather. So sailors took this as a dependable warning that a storm was on its way, but some thought that the birds actually brought the stormy weather with them, making a flock of storm petrels at a ship's stern a really worrisome sight. In fact, some seafarers went so far as to call it good luck if a storm petrel happened to defecate on them as they passed over them. Well, this is a good time to remind you of the first rule of birding. Never look up with your mouth open. Word to the wise. So killing a storm petrel, even in retaliation for crapping on you, was and is still considered bad luck. So, as if the shooter wishes to invite bad weather for a very, very long stay. So, if you want to find yourself caught at sea in the middle of a hurricane, all you have to do is shoot down a storm petrel. And as long as we're on the subject of disgusting things people do at sea, fishermen of old observed gray herons standing patiently waiting for fish to swim by at just the right distance and decided that something about the heron's feet must attract the fish. So they carried a heron's foot to improve their luck in fishing. And some even coated their fishing lines with a noxious goo they made from heron's fat and feet. As this practice has faded, we can assume that it was not particularly effective and perhaps intolerably disgusting. I also learned some fairly dark things about birds' lives, and I made a point of including these in the book because readers need to know that some of the world's birds face challenges from people with very selfish ends. The parrots of the Caribbean islands, for example, have been poached nearly to death for the black market on pet birds. Some of the islands have moved to name these birds as their national symbols, which has released funds and organized efforts to save them. But on some of these islands, it's virtually impossible to see the parrots that were once abundant there. You need special permission to go into protected wildlife refuges that have highly elevated levels of security. And then we have the fate of the ortolan, a tiny bird that has had the bad luck of becoming a delicacy in parts of Europe. The recipe is gruesome. They fatten the bird up in a cage for more than 3 weeks, and then they actually kill it by drowning it in Armagnac brandy. The chef then cooks it and serves it whole, and the gourmands who eat the ortolan pop it down in one bite. But first, they toss a napkin over their face so they won't be seen stuffing this thing in their mouths. Only the beak remains on the plate when they're finished. I'm glad to report that the European Union, in all of its wisdom, has banned this practice, but there are still corners of Europe where the name ortolan makes mouths water and ortolan continue to disappear. Finally, let's talk about birds that don't exist. As we have seen, long before we began to understand birds in scientific terms, miraculous flying creatures became part of nearly every culture's mythology. Sometimes the powers of actual living birds simply did not rise to the level the gods and storytellers required, so birds needed to do something more. Meld with the body of a god or goddess, for example, or become the lead character in a myth so vivid that it needs a supernatural species to tell it. So creating birds that have supernatural powers makes them larger than life. It allows them to attach all kinds of deeds and stories to them, and anything becomes believable. This makes these mythical birds the catalyst for just about any situation that requires an explanation beyond the ordinary. They may have the ability to heal the sick, determine if crops will thrive or wither, bestow happy marriages or fidelity on lucky couples, bring good luck and prosperity, or guide people to new lands where they can build their capital city. In Egypt, the god, I used to say Thoth, I now understand it's Tot, takes on the mantle of a bird, specifically an African sacred ibis, while he controls the passage of time and the change of seasons. Tot is the god of the moon, wisdom, writing, hieroglyphics, science, magic, and art. So he's a busy guy. And the ibis head allows him to change the pace of the passage of time, giving him more time to work. Special note, this only works for him. Don't try it at home with your own ibis. On the flip side of this benevolence, a mythical bird called an uzlam provides an excuse for foolishness, shifting the blame for mistakes away from humans and onto a bird too silly to behave itself. Oh, it wasn't me, it was the uzlam. In British and Australian legend, the uzlam flies in a spiral of tighter and tighter circles until it eventually flies up its own butt. I'm guessing that everyone listening knows an uzlam in some form. Here's the Feng Huang, or Chinese phoenix, one of China's 12 ornaments, ancient symbols that denoted the power and authority of the wearer. The ornaments date back at least to 2294 BC and maybe a lot longer. They were embroidered on the clothing of high-ranking people in Chinese society. The description of this beast has changed over the millennia, so this picture here follows the more recent depictions, more or less. A golden pheasant's head, a mandarin duck's body, a peacock's tail, a crane's legs, and a parrot's bill. Wherever the Feng Huang appears, it implies the virtue and honesty of the people it adorns. So it often appears at weddings as a blessing of fidelity and harmony, and some households bring out their Feng Huang to display in good times and hide it away when times turn tough. Now, exactly how and where we acquired the legend of the phoenix has been a subject of debate for thousands of years. It appears long before Greek mythology cemented the story of the immortal bird who eventually tired of its cushy life in paradise. Phoenix traveled to the mortal world where things live and die, but the bird knew that it would remain immortal. So one night, Phoenix built a nest of twigs, and as he waited for Apollo, the sun god, to arrive with the sun, he began to sing. Morning came, and Apollo passed over in his golden chariot, but the sun god so admired Phoenix's song that he actually stopped in midair to listen. As he enjoyed the song, a spark of the sun dropped down onto Phoenix's nest of twigs. The nest ignited, and Phoenix burst into flames, dissolving into ashes. Ah, but all was not lost for the phoenix. 3 days later, the magical bird sprang up from the ashes, young and renewed and as fresh as ever. And the bird realized that he could do this again and again and again, but he understood somehow that he would have to wait 1,000 years until his next renewal. He continues to repeat the cycle of death and rebirth as he will for eternity. Oops, there is Apollo and his chariot and the phoenix rising from the ashes. I got caught up in the story here. All right, so that's the complete language of birds, with stories about nearly 400 species of birds around the world. It's illustrated rather than photographic, as you've seen, with vintage drawings by a wide range of artists, mostly of the 19th and early 20th centuries. This was an utterly delightful book to write. I don't think I've ever had as much fun writing a book as I did with this one. It combined my love of birds, natural science, and history, and I hope it's as much fun for you as it was for me. So thank you so much for the opportunity to share these stories with you today. And I am happy to take whatever questions you have.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Randy. That was, um, I mean, everything, just gorgeous and interesting and fascinating. Although I do have a question from somebody in the chat asking, if no birds from India?
Oh my, there are certainly birds from India in the book. Yes, absolutely. I can't name them for you right now, but I know there were quite a number of books of birds in the Southeast Asian area. Yeah, this is only about 15 birds of the 400 in the book, so I promise you they are there.
You're plenty. Would you like to turn off your share screen and we can go through the question? Perfect. Okay,
Sure.
so yes, this is being recorded. I will send out a recording link to everybody, a video link to everybody after the talk. Probably like in a couple of hours or so. But yes, that was amazing. I unexpected, like I thought you were just going to be talking about birds migrating, but actually the history. And now I get why when I asked you about your name Minotaur, you said just like the mythology. I was like, okay,
Right,
now I get
right,
it.
exactly.
Fabulous. So you had mentioned right at the end that this is illustrated by many artists. So are all of the artists listed with their artwork in the book so that we can know who they are?
Yes, in the back of the book, they are all the ones that we know are listed. One of the reasons that the publisher went this way is because these illustrations are mostly in the public domain. So some of them we honestly don't know who did them, but for all the ones we know, they are there.
Perfect. Did you or your husband Nick do any of the artwork?
No, no, I am a writer. That's not something I can do, unfortunately. And actually, I believe there is an illustrator on staff that united some of these images in ways that made them work for the book. So, but I unfortunately I don't know her name. So,
Yeah, that's okay. But the photographs are Nick's. Is that correct?
oh yeah, the photos interspersed in the presentation, those are Nick's photos. You
Okay.
bet.
He's an amazing photographer.
Oh, thank you.
Lori asks, what were some of your sources?
Oh my goodness. There were many things. There are some specific books that are about, as I said, about birds at sea that go into every single superstition, and it's amazing that they're like 400 pages long. I actually had a lot of different ways to get information because some of these stories are passed down still orally, particularly in the Caribbean.
Mhm.
And that's a tricky thing altogether. I benefited from a librarian who actually pulled something handwritten out of a file to tell me about parrots. So that was exciting. There are also, the internet is a wonderful thing. There are specific websites where people collect these stories as well. And then it's a matter of comparing one to the other and saying, well, what seems more plausible here and what seems more like she's making it up?
Mhm.
Because there are some that just say, oh, that can't be right. That they just, there's always a sense to the mythology. There's a logic to why the story goes the way it does. And you can tell when somebody is just, pulling it out of their ear, essentially, because it doesn't make sense.
Mhm.
So yeah, but there are many sources like that out there. And there's also, things like Bullfinch's mythology and some of the really tried and true, traditional sources for this kind of information.
So I forgot to mention that Charles early on in the chat said that he's been to 424 of the national parks. So you have some work to
Ooh,
do. You have some
ooh,
competition.
I'd love to know which six he hasn't been to. Probably the new ones, all the new ones that Biden created,
Oh,
I would
maybe.
guess, is what he
Charles?
hasn't been to.
Yeah, Charles, if you're
Oh,
still here, let us know. Um,
yeah, that's brilliant. Good for you. I really want to know about Kobuk Valley.
Ooh.
At the very top of Alaska. I want to know how you got there.
Lita asks, had you had previous experience writing before deciding to become a travel writer?
Oh, yes. I've been writing since I was 8 years old. I sold my first story at 19. I was a contributing editor to the Dallas Observer. I wrote Death and Weather for the Dallas Morning News. And then I moved back home to Rochester and uh, ran a magazine. That was an existing magazine that hired me to be their editor. So at 23 years old. So yeah, I've been writing my whole life.
Mhm.
And I spent about 15 years in advertising and public relations because people tell you need a career to fall back on. I'm glad I did that. It let me buy my house, but I was miserable. And 30 years ago, I gave all of that up and have been, for the last 23 years, I've been writing books.
You do
And
seem pretty
also,
happy.
yeah, we have an obscene amount of fun, Nick and I. We've been very, very blessed with what we are able to do with our lives.
I'm just going to say that I'm really loving the emoji action going on with this group. Good job, everyone. Charles put his contact information in the chat, which I will send to you afterwards. And he asked if you're a member of the National Park Travelers Club.
I used to be. When I became a travel writer, they decided that I was going to somehow tread on their intellectual property of where the passport stamps were. So they
Mhm.
kicked me out. Believe me, I never did what they thought I was going to do, and I frankly am really insulted that they would think I had so little integrity. But it's fine, you don't need them to enjoy the national parks. And I'm sure those people, that was 20 years ago. I'm sure those people are long gone, and they're probably very nice people now.
I hope so.
Mhm.
I'm going to remind everybody to put your questions in the Q&A because the chat often goes by too quickly for me to remember catch all of the questions. Kristen wants to know if you have any crow stories in your book, especially about Native Americans or early civilizations.
I do. Yes, there's a whole section about crows and ravens. Crows figure very prominently, both in Native American culture and also, further north in Alaskan culture. And there are a lot of stories, both the positive and the negatives. So yes, there's a whole bunch of stuff about crows.
Mhm. And did you say that there's 400 stories in this book?
There are 400 birds, and each of them has a narrative of some kind. Yes.
Okay, everybody, remember, get it from your library or buy it from I know you had put a link in the on your slide, but also from Aesop's Fable, which is our local bookstore. So I'll put all of that out to you guys if you want to try to get this book because it's amazing. Do you have a favorite bird? If so, why?
Oh man, it's so hard to say because my favorite bird is usually the one I just saw. But I love woodpeckers in particular. I just think they're fascinating. Every time a pileated woodpecker shows up in my yard, I have to drop everything and watch it. They're just such wonderful, big, easy to see birds. But I also, roseate spoonbill down in the Florida area. I had the pleasure of writing about the life history of a particular limpkin that found its way up from Central Florida into about 50 miles from my house, and I got to follow the journey that it took to get it. A whole bunch of rehabbers got together and managed to transport this bird back home safely. So limpkin, I'm partial to limpkin, which, if you don't know, that's a tall brown bird about the size of a heron, covered with little white speckles. It's a fascinating bird. It only eats snails, and only particular snails. So,
Like the
yeah, very
French.
choosy.
Okay, so Madeline asked a question which I think is fascinating. Did you find many stories about how or why birds came to have the ability to fly? Because that ability must have been so amazing to early humans as they are today. I'm so awed by birds.
Yes, there are some stories about that, just a couple really. It's funny what people are willing to take for granted about what they see around them. It's like, insects fly, birds fly. Isn't that interesting? And they move on.
Mm.
But no question that because birds can fly, they became sacred to a lot of cultures and became, sort of as on the whole, and then also became the messengers to the spirit world to a lot of people.
Mhm.
And that we see that motif over and over and over again in the mythologies, which is fascinating. But how they actually came to fly, there are a couple of stories about that, but no, they're kind of sketchy.
Okay, well, I'm gonna have to read about them and make my own opinion. I just want to let everybody know that Randy has agreed to stay for a few extra minutes to try to get to as many questions as possible. So don't feel shy by throwing your questions in the Q&A. Carla says, you mentioned the National Parks Passport. Do you also have a senior pass that allows you into all the national parks for free?
Oh yes. Yep, we bought it when it was still $10. So, so yes, absolutely. It's only $80 now, and it gets you into the parks for free the rest of your life. So, for God's sake, why wouldn't you buy that? But yeah, it was the first thing we did when my husband turned 65. We went that day and we bought it.
Wow, most people sign up for Medicare, but okay.
Oh,
Um,
we did that too. Yeah. But
um,
yeah, but that was, hey, priorities.
Absolutely. And you know what? Our library has a parks pass, so people can take it out from the library and get into at least parking for free at the Massachusetts park. So definitely check out your library for opportunities to go to parks in your state.
Isn't that interesting? That's really clever.
Us librarians.
Mhm.
Judith has a question that I also have. Are those objects hanging off the drapes in your background? Because that's really
Oh, back
interesting.
here.
Yeah.
Okay. All right. I will get up for a second and show you that this is my patch collection. All those embroidered patches you can buy at national parks.
Oh my
This is there's
God.
these are cedar planks. There's one like you'd line a closet with. There's one for every state, and I hot glue my patches to them at the end of every of yeah, at the end of every trip. So I can turn one here real quick.
As long as you're wearing pants, just want to make sure.
What?
As long as you're wearing pants, just want to make sure.
Oh, yes. Yes, I certainly am. Just a
Okay.
second.
I'm in my pajamas. That's why I can say that.
Can you see that?
Ooh, not
But yeah, but
wow. So do
but
you have,
yeah,
so are there 360 or almost 360 patches there?
yeah, easily. Yeah,
Wow.
actually a bunch more because I also pick up patches at other places that that we stop at, like the Meteor Crater in Arizona and, things like that, and really good state parks.
Mhm. That's really planful of you. Like, like on Facebook when somebody has a picture of their family every year in the same exact outfits and stuff like that. I'm like, how did you even think of it? Amazing. Lindsay asks, what is your favorite national park for seeing birds?
Overseeing, well, Everglades. There's nothing like Everglades. For even now, even with the Burmese pythons, eating everything in sight, it's still Mecca for water birds. And even as many times as we've been there many, many times. We still can't, we still find things that we haven't seen before there. So
That's like rereading a book. You're always discovering something new, some new
yes,
nuance, some new. Yeah, that's awesome. Mary Ann says this is a wonderful program. Randy, what were your passions before the birding and the book and the bird?
theater. Yeah, but this is the thing that when um, my husband and I both worked in the theater when we were young. Well, he still does, but when I was much younger, when we met, it was because we were both working at the same professional theater, and I left the theater to go into the private sector because I'm a better writer than I am at really a stage manager or anything else, and suddenly had all my evenings and weekends free. And Nick grew up with his mom was a birder. So he said to me, as I was sort of moping around the house, like, what do I do now? He said, well, you might like bird watching. So we got a little feeder, one of those little suction cup feeders that you put on a window, and we put it out, and two house finches showed up the same day. And I had never seen these little pink birds before, and I flipped out. I was completely hooked. So house finch was my spark bird, as we say. That was the one that just sucked me right in. And from there, I've been a member of the Rochester Birding Association ever since. So that was 32 years ago.
Well, that certainly explains why you're such a good speaker because you were in the arts. So that makes sense to me. Larry asks, have you been to Fort Moultrie near
Yep.
Charleston? Okay.
Yes, I have.
Okay.
Yeah. In the cold, the day that we were there, we drove across, we were coming back from Florida. We drove across the Florida state line into Georgia, and the temperature dropped 30 degrees. It was the weirdest darn thing. So, yeah, so I'll never forget Fort Moultrie. That was a cold, cold place.
Oh, well, you're sort of in New England now, so it is kind of cold here too. Leslie says, I'm sorry I was late and I may have missed this. I don't think you did. Are there any historical insights into male cardinals? Thank you for the fascinating webinar.
Historical insights. Well, there were to this day uh, people like my neighbors believe that cardinals, particularly the male cardinals, are the messengers from the beyond. That they are coming to us as our spiritual advisors from people, from loved ones that we have lost. So if you see a cardinal in your backyard, it's somebody trying to get in touch with you, hopefully with good wishes.
Mm,
And that's a nice thing. And you want to attribute that to cardinals, that's just fine.
mhm,
But the red cardinal is one of the birds that is often referenced in that story about the fox and the goldfinch. In a lot of those stories, in a lot of cultures, it's the cardinal that's the one that comes in as a dull, dun-colored bird and walks away bright red and gorgeous.
mhm.
So yeah, so we have that.
That's funny. My mother always said that when you have the hiccups, somebody from the beyond is thinking of you. So I'll have to think about that with the cardinals. So, my friend David says, just to thank you for the book for bringing attention to the birds, their mythology, and the danger they are in. This is a great question. All national parks are special, but which
Mhm.
top seven would you recommend that we start with?
7.
Yeah, I'll say
Wow.
you, or you could do five, but five to seven.
Right. Well, Zion. I know most people say Yellowstone, Yosemite. You're going to get to those. Everyone gets to those. Zion is to me the most beautiful place I have ever been, and it's a park that you can have a relationship with because you go in at the bottom of the canyon instead of the top of the canyon. So it's like a big Vermilion hug with 2,000 foot high walls on either side of you. It's spectacular and doesn't feel nearly as big as it is. That being said, I also wrote Death in Zion National Park, and there a lot of people do make bad mistakes in Zion. But yeah, Zion, Big Bend at the bottom of Texas is a spectacular place as well. Very unusual, not like anything else in the whole national park system. I'm particularly fond of Theodore Roosevelt Park in North Dakota.
Mhm.
Also a very accessible park. You can drive through the whole thing. It's beautiful, but you really have to get out and walk because you get back into those hills and it's just one spectacular view after another. Um, those are the first ones that come to mind in terms of the scenic parks. I had what I consider a religious experience in Dinosaur National Monument. The first time I walked in and saw that wall of dinosaur bones still embedded in the stone, um, not that I ever had any doubt that there had been dinosaurs, but boy, that brings it home to you that there they are, that they're still almost assembled. It's really something. So those are the ones that come to mind immediately. And then I tell everybody you got to go to Everglades. Just make sure you pack all the bug spray you can.
Stay away from alligators. Stephen asks, this is such a funny question because I think you're already doing it. What will you take up when you retire?
This is my retirement. Yeah, but what else will I do? Genealogy. I,
Oh,
I got to figure out my family. There's a lot of weird, ghosts and goblins in my background, and I want to find out about that. But that's probably the thing I will do when I can't,
when you
you know,
can't find
when
out.
it's January and it's dark,
Like
when
now.
you want to bury yourself in something. But I have 4 contracts for this year and 2 books coming out later this year. So
Oh my.
this is not slowing down.
Well, we don't want you to really. He did ask if you can repeat the passport saga, but I'm going to refer him back to the recording later so that we can get on to some more questions.
Okay.
Anne asks, and I have the same question, how did you choose the birds to include in your book? There are 400, and yet there's so many more birds.
I know. Well, I looked for which ones had enough material to tell a good story.
Hmm.
And then there were also some where the story needs to be told, where they didn't necessarily have mythology, but somebody needs to be talking about these Caribbean parrots, that there are 40 or 50 of them where there used to be tens of thousands. Somebody needs to be talking about the Guam rail, that there are like 20 of them left on Earth because during World War II, when the ships came into Guam, they had stowaways that were brown snakes, and brown snakes eat Guam rail.
Mm-hmm.
So the brown snakes, did what snakes do. They got onto land, they multiplied like, crazy things, and they ate all the rails. So now they have one sanctuary that is just they have somehow made snake proof, and they police this thing. Oh my God. But that's the thing. There's 20 of them left on Earth. That story needs to be told.
Yeah, absolutely. Someone who wants to know if birds have been used during war to send messages.
Oh, sure. Homing pigeons and carrier pigeons, that's a real thing. Yeah, they absolutely have been. They have. happily we have much better ways of doing that now, so we don't need to victimize the birds. But yeah, because who can catch a bird on the wing,
Mhm.
other than maybe an eagle? So yes, that was absolutely a thing.
Okay. Danny says, I'll be 30 next month. I just started really noticing and enjoying watching the birds in my neighborhood the year past or two. Is there a good definitive source that a beginner should pick up as a starting point?
Boy, I would say the most important thing you need to have is a good field guide, and you can get those now to be on your phone, so you don't have to be carrying a book around anymore. But there is something to be said for leafing through the book, and I would say what probably anyone would say. It's the Sibley Guide. David Sibley did just a masterful job of creating images that show you many different facets of the same bird and all the variations in plumage and all of those things all in one book. It's a tremendous resource, and you'll learn a whole lot from that.
Mhm. Interestingly, even I know that resource, birder, but like there's also is it like what is that place that it's an app. It's I'm sure you know it. You can hear birds song
Oh,
on it. You can
uh,
hear,
oh, Merlin.
is it Merlin or is it something?
Merlin, the one that recognizes birdsong?
Yeah, yeah.
Yes. Yeah. Yeah, let me give a shout out to the Cornell Laboratory of
Cornell.
Ornithology.
That's it. That's it.
Yes. Yeah. Cornell has, if there was a Nobel Prize in birding, they would have it, because they have brought together the entire world around eBird, their app that you record the birds that you've seen and where you've seen them and when you've seen them, and the whole world. Um, that not only puts in their data, but they also take it out, that we all use it to figure out where to go to see the birds that we want to see in real time. I mean, it's an extraordinary thing, and I have used it when I've written field guides and things. I have used the data in eBird, but they also created Merlin, which is a miracle. The app that will listen to what you're hearing and tell you what bird you're hearing. It's just an amazing thing.
Mhm.
So yeah, shout out to Cornell. And then of course their website, All About Birds, which for free tells you everything you want to know about any species in tremendous depth. So lots of terrific resources there, all electronic.
Excellent. Oh, yes. Like I said, even I've heard of those. Shonda asks, what is your favorite place for bird watching when you're not traveling? I added the when you're not traveling part.
Oh, okay. You mean like around here? I live at the base of a hill called Cobb's Hill. And at the top of that hill is the ultimate warbler migrant trap when they go through on their way to cross Lake Ontario to go up to where they're going to breed. In May, up there, it's paradise. I mean, you get every kind of warbler that comes through the eastern half of the US. It's just amazing for about 2 weeks, and then it stops, and then it's woodpeckers and sparrows, which are nice. Um, with that in mind, the other place just across the border from us is Point Pelee, which is a provincial park in Canada, in Ontario, Canada. Uh, that's where all the birds, when they cross Lake Ontario, that's where they land, and they're tired, and they'll sit there and they'll look at you and they'll let you look at them, and they're at eye level, and it's like nothing I've ever experienced. So tremendous fun.
Mhm. So the reason I added that part was because it's true that you don't have to travel far to find birds. They're everywhere
Hmm.
around us. Look locally. Go to the national parks if you can, but obviously you can just go to your backyard if you just don't have, the
Right.
opportunity. Alexander makes a comment, and then I'm going to have asked two more questions, which
Okay.
I also agree with, so I have to read it. Interesting, your other interest was theater, was going to compliment you not only on the topic and illustrations, but also your presentation was entertaining and your enthusiasm and warm voice was relaxing.
Oh, well, that's very sweet. Thank you very much. I mean, how can I possibly not have a good time, talking about this topic? But I really appreciate that. That's very nice of you to say. Thank you.
Like I said, I felt the same way. I was just like, wow, your voice is really perfect for like, so anyways, um, yeah. What do you think about light pollution and migrating birds?
Oh, that's a huge problem. And that's something that we at the Rochester Birding Association are trying to fight against. Here in New York, there is a bill in the assembly that we're trying to get to advance called the Dark Skies Act, which would get everybody, all these, big skyscrapers downtown to turn their lights off after 11 o'clock,
Mhm.
if not earlier, but that would be a good time during the migration. And now that we have Birdcast, which you may or may not know about, that's also a Cornell project, that can tell us exactly when the big waves of birds are coming through on migration. There's just no reason not to just turn off the lights. What do you need these neon things on after dark? So at that much after dark. So we're working on that, and I know that it's all over the country. Austin, Texas has a model program that was pushed through by the birding club there.
Mhm.
So this is a thing that can happen, that it can be done. It's such a no-brainer, and takes so little effort that we're hoping that we can make it law.
That would be great. David asks, any stories about the origin of sexual dimorphism, why male birds are so much showier than females?
Boy, that's a science question that's a little beyond my pay grade. Um,
You had mentioned
I
that.
mean, I know why that is, obviously to attract a mate. It's for sexual selection, so that only the showiest and the brightest and the strongest, actually pass their genes on to the next generation. That's always been the case. But beyond that you need a scientist for that, and that's not me.
Well, I have one last question, which is you had mentioned having two more books out in the coming year. What's up next for you?
Well, the third edition of my book, Hiking Waterfalls in New York, it comes out in May this year. And then, but more interesting, honestly, and maybe in a year we'll want to have another conversation, is a book called The Bear at the Bird Feeder, which is about uh, wildlife living in urban areas and how we can live in harmony with them. I just finished that like a month ago, and it's with my editor now, and it's a lot of information about. But there's some stories in there about, what happens to people when a coyote shows up in their backyard, those kinds of things. But it also gives you a lot of advice about how to deal with bears, mountain lions, bobcats, alligators, wild turkeys. Uh, the wild turkeys have taken over Staten Island, and that could be a book by itself. But Canada geese, we all know about the potential nuisance of too many Canada geese. Coyotes, raccoons, squirrels, foxes, and skunks.
Oh, my goodness.
So,
Well,
yeah.
I'm just gonna say I could have you back next week. I don't know if I can wait a year.
Oh, thank you. Aren't you sweet? Oh, look at
Well,
all the hearts.
I
Oh,
know, I know. People have
wow.
been loving this. But yes,
That's
I will
great.
definitely be in touch to reschedule, have another scheduled. Maybe Nick could join us. Who knows?
Sure, absolutely.
Would
Yeah.
have a great time. But in the meantime, thank you so much for this amazingly interesting and fascinating conversation about something that I hadn't really thought about as much, like the mythology around birds, as well as much as birding, like on a current basis. So, thank you for opening my eyes, and I think a lot of people's eyes to the history around birds.
Terrific. Thank you so much. This is what a delight this has been. And what a great audience. It's funny when you can't see the audience, you don't always know if they're having a good time, but it looks like you did. So thank you so much. And I'll look forward to the next time we connect.
Absolutely. And thank you all for being here tonight. I hope you enjoyed it as much as I did, and I will be in touch with you as well. So happy birding, everybody. Good night.
Bye bye.